Hi, welcome back to the channel. Well, when I started using Rockstar Editor to make garage tours and then later on showcases, I found it rather hard to use. I fell into a number of traps and pitfalls because I couldn't find anywhere a clear and concise explanation as to how I should film my garage tours, or later how I could track cars, etc. with a camera. So if you're wanting to move on with Rockstar Editor and make your own videos, this tutorial is going to be for you. I'm going to start with simple techniques like the interface, learning straight camera movements as you see now. Then we move into curves, car tracking and other more advanced features, but all the time aiming to keep them simple. Please note the watermark on the top left because I'm going to come back to that. We now have a short demonstration video that I prepared earlier so you can see the sort of transitions etc. that we're going to be looking at. The subject car is the Michele GT because you haven't seen my version of this before. I've done it up to look like the Alfa Romeo Giulia Sprint GTA that was driven by Frank Stippler last year for the St Mary's Cup race on the Goodwood Revival. I was so impressed with how Frank drove it that I went straight back into the game afterwards and recustomised mine completely to look like his. So while you watch the sort of shots we're going to learn how to make, just a few notes then about the tutorial. As soon as it starts, it will be done in a live environment. Now I do have a mechanical keyboard and a rather clicky mouse, and I'm afraid you will be hearing those and maybe one or two other noises as I record, so I apologise about that. As well as going through this in a clear and logical fashion with the aim of building our skills as we go, I'll also put chapter marks in so you can easily re-watch something if you need to. However, if you still have any queries afterwards that you cannot resolve, please don't hesitate to leave a comment with a question and I will always come back and sort you out. So with no further ado, let's get down to it. Well, to edit something we have to film something, and it's quite easy. You push the appropriate button on console. I don't know of course what that is, but on PC it's the F1 key, and you can see now we are recording on the bottom left. That lady likes the car. Okay, and then you just drive and there's nothing else to do. It is keeping a note of everything now that is going on in the entire game world to remake it later. So you just concentrate on driving the car. Now we're going to go to a garage, the same garage that the Alpha is kept in fact, so we can look at how to record a garage. Note that on entering a property, recording has stopped. You'll always need to start again when you enter a garage or apartment. To record the garage, I need the camera to go up the side I'm looking at, back down the other side. So the best thing is to hide my character out of the way for about 20 or so seconds. That will give the camera time to get past the Viper and the Escort, and for me to then hide on the other side of the garage. So hiding here and timing about 20 seconds. I've pushed the button, I'll speed some of this up. Enough time is now passed, so I'll run my character back to the other side, the camera having already got past that black Escort, and I will keep recording now until the clip finishes, which in these 10 car garages tends to be about a minute, which is long enough to record what you need. I won't make you wait, but we will use this clip later when we do some editing. Before we get to the editor, just a setting that I think you should check. So you need to go into story mode and then into settings. Once you're in settings, you can go down to Rockstar Editor, and you can see here I have 10 gigabytes of space allocated to store these clips. I used to have 5, but I kept overrunning, so make sure you allocate something reasonable. Also from story mode, you can get into Rockstar Editor. The initial interface is pretty self-explanatory. Obviously you would start with creating a new project. In the load project area you can also get rid of projects that you finish with and no longer need. I'll show you that only with clips. Director mode I haven't used, that's quite advanced, it's not necessary for this tutorial. Clip management, I have a little bit here prepared and I will show you this. Once you enter clip management you will see all your clips by date. You can even preview them from here. The little chain symbol means they've already been used for a project. Now you can mark clips for delete. I'm just marking here the recent Corvette project. It's the Q key on PC. You'll see some other ones I've already marked, and in fact I've marked quite a number of clips that I need to get rid of. You escape out, you go into mark for delete, and there's my 50 odd clips that I no longer need. and you can hit one button. For me it's delete, and all those clips go. So just handy to know how to get rid of those. Let us start a new project and we will learn how to move the camera about. First thing we have to do, add a clip. This clip here, clip 004, that is 1 minute and 6 seconds long, that is the clip I just made from the garage. So we will hit the enter key and it will appear on our timeline, and for me certainly it's enter again to edit the clip. We'll talk a little bit about the cameras. They always focus initially on your player's character, and ignoring everything below the word cameras, if I enter the camera, you see you can have a game camera. It's the game without the HUD overlay. Free camera, that's the important bit. You can also have cameras that are preset to the front, rear, right, left and overhead your character, but we will stick to the free camera. Once selecting free camera, I need to go down to edit camera. Now on the PC I fly the camera around effectively as if I was playing a first-person shooter with the very same keys and mouse movements, so it's fairly instinctive, and I imagine that something very similar has happened on console. So I can move the camera around quite independently within a certain distance of myself. In most garages it is not a problem, but it's very easy on the street to want to do things with your camera further away than it will actually go. As well as flying it around, there's also height controls, there are zoom controls, and there are roll controls. And I will say that if you curve the camera around, sometimes it will leave the center position, so you may need to get used to just checking your roll control is actually straight. I mentioned that we get a watermark for the first 10 seconds, so I don't really want to start doing anything on here till 10 seconds has gone, because I'm going to need to delete that part in my video editor. So before I start, I'm going to escape. I'm going to find a place on the timeline that's about 10 seconds in. Then I'm going to hit M on my keyboard anyway to get the cameras. I'll hit cameras again to get a free camera. Let's talk about the blend modes. If you don't use blend modes, the camera does not move. And if you put two cameras a distance apart, it will just sit on one camera till it's time to jump to the other camera. So you're going to need to blend, and smooth works very well. The blend easing is the acceleration and the deceleration of the camera in and out of the blend point, and it's best left to smooth. So for these sort of tracks, free camera, blend mode smooth, blend easing on will do what you want. If we move down to edit camera and select that, we can fly the camera to our first position. I say I want to start on this Viper here, so let's say that's my start position. Save the camera. With my first camera on the timeline, I needed another camera in about 4 seconds time in the same place, and then for it to move smoothly down the row. Now the camera is going to try to move back to its original starting spot, which will be awkward when I put a spot in 4 seconds time. So the trick is in fact to put the point just after the camera you made, so close that it hasn't had time to even move the picture. Once you've made and saved that camera, now drag it up about 4 seconds worth, and there we are, you've got 4 seconds of stillness. I know now that I need about 3.5 seconds per car as the quickest I can go, and 3.5 times I've got 4 more cars to go is 14. So let's add another 14 seconds to that and put a camera at 28 seconds and edit the camera. And as you can see, I come all the way to the end of the row because I'm just going to do a straight line transition. And let's say I want to finish, sorry if this is a bit sick making, finish about here. Save the camera. Now the camera is going to run up the row, but I do need again a few seconds to look at the alpha, so I should again click and put a new camera in very close. Save it, drag it on a few seconds. Now if we watch, we should have pretty much exactly what we want, and if not, it's very easy to go back and edit. So always save your projects until they are up on YouTube. At that point, it doesn't matter, and perhaps you will get rid of them. But this looks quite nice. It's the right sort of pacing, the right sort of speed. And we paused on this car. Oh, out of interest, the camera is now going to simply move itself back to where my character is. I do, of course, need to turn the camera around and face the next car. So if I make a point again a few seconds afterwards and edit the camera, sorry, fingers are on the wrong keys. Let's say I want the camera to look like this for the next car, and I save it. If we play, the camera takes really the best straight line to the next point and starts to move on. We don't need to do any more here because any other lessons we'll learn whilst tracking the car, but it's the same principle down this side with the pausing of the camera. My character is now over there, so the run down this side with the camera facing this way will also not show the character. When we finished editing our clip, we can escape back to the menu, of course, and if we escape again, it will normally alert to save the changes. I'll say yes. When we get back to the main menu, you'll see it's called it Project 14. Well, you may like to actually give it a name that you know what it actually is instead, and save it again. To export the project, you hit export. I always choose 60 frames per second high. I don't know where a console exports it to, somewhere on its storage, of course. On a PC it goes to a rather strange place, and I will actually put down below how you find where it sends all your footage. When you do export, it does give you a name, which I normally keep the same, and it gives you a chance to preview your footage. You can see it here with the watermark on the top left, and then once the watermark and the first 10 seconds is over, that's the bit I'll be actually keeping. I tend to watch all of these because it's my last chance before I stick it into my video editor. Yesterday I drove the Alpha round and recorded for a couple of minutes or so, so we already have some raw footage and we're going to use that to learn the more advanced techniques. So back in the editor we create a project, add a clip, and I know it's these last 4 clips here. So it's clip 5, and at this point you can actually escape out, add another clip, and just put all of your clips on the timeline. So clips 5, 6, 7 and 8 are on the timeline. I'll cycle back to the first one, clip 5. We're going to learn how to do a nice curve with the camera around the car. So we'll enter. We have to remember we're going to lose 10 seconds, of course, so making the first point about here. Put a camera in, a free camera, smooth, edit camera. Let's say we want to go from the front of the car to the back of the car, so I shall fly the camera around to the position I choose and save it. And let's say at the end of the clip, which is going to be looking up here another 15 seconds away, that's where I want to be at the back. So I'll actually click the back marker here, edit camera, and fly around to my finish point. So far so good, we save. Now when we play this back, to start with it looks ideal, but then you realise the camera is taking the best straight line and it's cutting in quite close and getting the car right on the very edges, occasionally over the edges of the screen. Well, it's very easy to make a curve that's nicer. All you do is you find your halfway point, click it, put another camera in, and when you come to this camera and edit it, maybe just change it slightly so that the car is dead central and pull it back a little bit. Save. That really is it. And now let's watch and see if we're happy. If you think the camera turns too much at one point, and if you think the curve is slightly more 2 straight lines, you can simply repeat the procedure. I won't, but you can add other points in. You can click here, bring the camera out and so on. It's much easier to start with your start and your finish point and then add the intermediate cameras than it is to try and do it the other way around. What you haven't seen is I escaped out and saved this as a new project called Drive. Now we've had the curve around the car, I'd like to get a nice shot of the character getting in the car and driving away, but keeping everything fairly smooth. So if we start with our first camera, we'll go for a free camera. It's not far off. Let's put it like this. If I do nothing, of course, the character will get in the car and the car will drive away, and it will remain in shot most of the time, but it won't be centered on the screen. So at some point I would like this to turn into a tracking camera. When do we need a tracking camera? Well, once the car has just about started to move, say here. So this time with the camera, instead of look at target none, I shall be selecting look at target player. I will add here that you can look at various numbers in here, and each number will refer to an NPC or even another player that happens to be around at the time. I want you to watch very carefully, look at the car as I click onto player, and you'll see something happen. There was a small change in perspective, and that's because my camera was aimed where I wanted to aim it, but when I selected player, the computer centered it onto the very center of the player itself, and there was a small difference there. Now the downside of that is if I do nothing more and I just play, you see there was that jerk there, and we don't really want that. There's a couple of ways of overcoming it. The easiest one is as follows. If we go back to the beginning, everything I do with effects, which we haven't looked at yet, or anything we do with the camera smoothing modes, etc., once you put one on the timeline, any point after that that you then decide to place will inherit that same setting, which is actually pretty useful. If you change your mind, of course, partway through a clip, you must undo that setting somewhere. So I want to actually smoothly blend the first clip into the driving away clip. So I'm going to go smooth there, and as a reminder, on the driving away clip there's no smoothing because the blend mode is none. Now this is not bad, and you could leave it like this. If you watch, it is actually moving with the player smoothly, and then it will track the player away. So the good point was that it was relatively smooth, and I think a lot of my showcases have been done very similarly. The bad point was as the player got in and out of the car, because it was already inheriting part of the next point's qualities, i.e. to follow the player, we did get some of that player movement, albeit smoothed out. There is a way of getting away with some of that, which is if we go back a bit and we put another point in roughly after the player has at least got into the car so that she's fairly static. Put a point in here, and just like our curves, we've gone exactly between 2 points. We're in a good place here to put an intermediate point. Select a camera, it's inherited the smoothing from the previous camera, which is perfect. And now what we should have is a relatively static camera for the first part. And it'll now smoothly blend into the track in the target, and off the car goes. And that is perfect right until it gets out of range. I mentioned before, the range isn't very much when you're outside. So let's just bring the timeline back till the car is just going out of range. And we're now going to look at another sort of tracking. I no longer want to look at the player from a fixed point of view, so I'll turn that to none. I want to move with the player, which I will turn on to player. There are two sorts of moving with the player. One is rigid. Now rigid is just like a GoPro, and we'll look at that one later. Flexible is the other, and we'll look at that one right now. So let's edit the camera and move up, and we'll take in fact a similar viewpoint to before, and we will save the camera. just go back a bit and see what happens. Flexible, as you're starting to see, mounts the camera on a fixed compass direction effectively. The camera is pointing roughly north at the moment, and the car turns around the camera, and as you can see it's rather handy, because as the car is turning we're getting all sorts of different camera angles and we're not doing any work. So we could say that clip is done. I don't think there's much more to do with that one. We'll escape, return to the timeline and move on to the next clip. So we're going to make the next clip a little bit more dynamic. We're not going to have such long gaps between the cameras. I want to do a shot now as if I was standing on the pavement. That means sidewalk in US. And in order to do this I need to look at the player. But I must mention there's a bit of a peculiarity. If I put look at player now, as I try to move the camera around and fly it to the pavement, it doesn't work. It's sort of stuck now on the player and I can't move it. So for look at target, I always suggest you go to none. Then you edit your camera. We can go to our maximum range. We can point it at the car. Just check my roll is actually okay after all of that. Save it. Now we'll look at the player. I think it actually rolled it again. Let's just be sure. And now if we watch, that's pretty good. What I want to do now is get a little bit of footage from inside the car. So for this we're going to go down to move with the target or move with the player. A flexible mount is not going to work, as you can imagine, with the car rotating around. We want a rigid sort of GoPro mount. And if I'm moving with the target I don't get that weird problem. At any point I can just edit the camera and fly it. So if we want to fly it into the car, say to here maybe. If the car's at any sort of angle you may need to roll the camera as well, but I think that's pretty good. Save the camera. Let's play. And there we are. Now we've got our nice interior shot. Let's look then now at some special effects. So let me put another camera on. Any effect I do, again, will continue on down the timeline. There's all sorts of filters. You can also make brightness and contrast type tweaks. Now these are very useful if you've got a dark garage or there's a bit of a colour cast inside the garage. You don't want to try and sort that colour cast in your video editor because you're not dealing with real film. You're better to deal with it here, where the game can properly brighten up or add saturation, etc. to your pixels. And we have filters. Now I think that some of these look quite fun. The one I use is right near the end of the row and it's called aisle 7, and the reason I use aisle 7 is it looks like a CCTV and it can be quite fun to pretend that the camera is driving past a CCTV and has been perhaps caught doing something wrong. So let's edit the camera. Let's put a CCTV here near my agency, facing back at that. Now I'll say to look at the player for the same reason as mentioned before. And if we go back a little bit, what we've now got is we've got our CCTV footage. Okay, what about another effect? We'll put a new camera. Remember, I must undo the effect at this point or it will continue forever. Some of these are very weird. What about slow motion? So we go to the speed here where we can speed up to 200% or down to, is it 20? No, down to 5%. We'll select 35%. And if you look at the timeline, it's all become stretched out because that piece of clip is now effectively 3 times longer. We'll now edit the camera. And again, another problem. Of course, I've got to get rid of that or I can't edit it. And of course I have forgotten to go back and say that. Okay, let's watch now. And we get our slow motion. Maybe not particularly useful there, but if the car jumps or does something particularly fun, it can be fun to add a little bit of slow motion in. And really, this is all you need to know to put together anything you want. You know how to put an effect in, you know how to change the speed of a clip. Obviously for our next clip we put it back to 100%. You know how to use the free camera to transit, how to get the camera to track the player, and how to get the camera to move with the player. Usually I'm using one or the other of these. I will add just one last useful thing, which is combining them. So on my free camera with my speed back to 100%, we're going to do an aerial track of the car. Go to maximum range. I'll save that, change it back to actually looking at the player. I'll play. Now let's say that at this point I'd like the camera to start moving to follow the player. Well, it's very easy just to make a new camera, add move with the target player, flexible or rigid, up to you. I think flexible works in almost every case. And now let's see what we've got. There we are. So it moved with the target, then it started to follow the target. Using just these techniques that I've shown you, you can replicate just about anything I've ever done in a garage tour or a showcase, etc. You could then go crazy, try a few new things. For example, fixing the camera in the car of an NPC whilst it drives along, but having it look at the player as perhaps the player overtakes or something like that. Once you've rendered your clips out, you do of course need to get them on YouTube. Now you could do this very simply, just get a lossless video editor, for example, just to chop off the first 10 seconds or chop off something you didn't need and just stick it up. Or you could edit it. Now for this you can use something simple like Windows Video Editor, but I highly recommend DaVinci Resolve. It's as powerful as Adobe Premiere Pro. There is a free edition with very few restrictions really. There is a steep learning curve, but if a few people would like me to, I'd be very happy to do a tutorial. I don't suppose it will be very short. This one wasn't very short. But I will go through all the basics you need in Resolve to cut a video together, put a voiceover, add music, and a few basics like that. And then you could run with that or start to follow a few good DaVinci Resolve creators on YouTube to learn some more advanced techniques if that's what you would like to do. So if you want that, let me know down below. This video took quite a long time to put together. I know it took you quite a long time to watch, but if you can give me a thumbs up, I would really appreciate that. And lastly, if you enjoy real-world car builds in the game of GTA, tutorials like this one, garage tours, etc., then please do consider hitting the subscribe button. And as always, I thank you so much for watching.